Hello, my name's Anitra, and I used to think silence meant strength, until the day my father poured gasoline across our front porch, screaming that I had stolen the house from my brother. My mother stood behind him, yelling that I deserved nothing. And my brother? He just stood there, filming, smirking. They said I was the problem, that I didn't belong. But what if the truth was never supposed to be told? What really happened inside that house? And why was my name the one they tried to erase? I was halfway through chopping garlic when the screen lit up. Mom. 3 years. 3 whole years, and not even a missed call, not a text, not a single happy birthday. But now, tonight, I stared at the name, letting the knife rest against the wooden board, heart pacing slow but heavy. I didn't answer right away. The kitchen light buzzed faintly above me, its hum oddly louder in the stillness of my one-bedroom apartment. Outside, the California dusk pressed soft orange against my window blinds, and the smell of garlic and butter lingered in the air. It was supposed to be just another quiet Friday night, one I earned after showing a duplex to a client who couldn't decide between warm gray and cool beige for 3 solid hours. The phone buzzed again. "Hey, Anitra." Her voice floated through like she hadn't disappeared on me for years. "I was thinking, maybe you could come by for dinner tonight." I blinked. "Tonight?" "It's just dinner. Brantley's home. Your father's been quiet lately. I thought it'd be nice, just like old times." The way she said nice made my stomach twist. But I said yes. I told myself it was just garlic knots. I hadn't made them in a while, but it used to be Brantley's favorite. Something small, safe, something neutral to bring. I figured if things got weird, I could blame it on traffic and leave early. That was the agreement I made with myself. 2 hours, max. The drive to the house was familiar enough to hurt. Same cracked sidewalks, same tired mailboxes, and the same sagging chain-link fence with a half-painted private property sign. That fence had been broken since Brantley's bike bent it out of shape sophomore year, and no one had ever fixed it. The further I drove, the further I slipped into memories that smelled like burnt popcorn and lemon pledge. I parked at the curb. Brantley's car was already there, spotless and shiny under the street lamp. I noticed the ring light inside the front window, already glowing like a third eye. That made my chest go tight. I grabbed the Tupperware of garlic knots from the passenger seat, checked my reflection once, then knocked, not loudly, just enough. The door opened in less than a second. Velda stood there, holding a dish towel. She wore her company smile, the one she used on neighbors or church people. It didn't reach her eyes. "Anitra, you look, well." There was no hug, no warmth. And just that nod, the kind you give a stranger who seems vaguely familiar. I stepped inside. The hallway smelled like old candles and overboiled cabbage. Some things never changed. "Brantley's setting up for a stream," she said casually, leading me toward the kitchen. "You know how he is, always working." I didn't answer. I just set the garlic knots on the counter and smiled. Too wide, too rehearsed. Gideon sat at the head of the dining table, newspaper folded in front of him, but untouched. He gave me a short nod, then went back to staring at nothing. "Dinner's almost ready?" Velda chirped, already ladling soup into mismatched bowls. "We made that potato leek one you used to like." I couldn't help but notice there were only 4 bowls, not 5. The empty place that used to be mine was already filled, with a camera tripod. We sat, or rather, I did. Everyone else already had their seats. I slipped into my old chair like it might creak beneath the weight of what hadn't been said in years. "So," Velda started, "how's work? Still doing real estate?" I nodded. "Independent now. Contracts mostly." She smiled. Thin. "That's nice." Brantley finally looked up from adjusting his lighting. "Glad you came by. Felix and I were just talking about how this place finally feels like ours." I blinked. "Felix?" Velda laughed lightly. "Oh, that's just what Brantley calls the house sometimes. Felix the fixer. He's been helping so much around here. Honestly, we're just grateful for the help." I nodded slowly, trying not to overthink it, but something in the way Brantley said it didn't sit right. We had to make some things clearer, Velda added quickly, like brushing crumbs off a table. You know, legally, your father thought it'd be best. My spoon paused halfway to my mouth. What things? She stood, walked over to the side drawer, and pulled out a manila folder, handed it to me like it was a napkin. Inside was a copy of the property deed. I scanned it, heart dropping with every line. My name? Gone. Replaced with Brantley's, first and last, printed in ink, too new, too clean. I looked up, waiting for an explanation. But all I got was Velda smoothing her apron and saying, "We thought it'd be less complicated this way. You've been gone so long and Brantley's been here, helping, fixing, being part of things. So you just removed me?" "It's not personal," Gideon said, still not looking at me. "It's practical." Brantley chuckled. "It's just paperwork, Nitra. You weren't really coming back, were you?" I stood slowly. The garlic knots sat untouched. I suddenly hated how soft they looked. I excused myself and walked down the hall. There, still hanging crooked on the wall, was the family photo from 15 years ago, the one Mom made us take after church. Brantley stood in the center, front and proud. I was off to the side, eyes half closed, a shadow fading into the backdrop. And now that picture felt like a prophecy. I stared at it until the hallway blurred, until the lines between memory and now felt the same. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just breathed in slowly and whispered to myself. I knew something was wrong the moment she said dinner. I just didn't know how wrong. She smiled when she handed me the soup. That soft, rehearsed smile that used to mean, "Company's over. Don't embarrass me." I hadn't tasted her cooking in years, but nothing about the bowl in front of me tasted like memory. It was hot, bland, and forgettable. Just like this house had become. No one asked why I looked at the deed with my lips pressed tight. No one asked if I was okay. After dinner, Velda collected the plates, stacking them gently like this whole thing hadn't been a setup from the moment I pulled into the driveway. Gideon got up with the stiffness of a man used to giving orders, not explanations. He stepped into the hallway, returned moments later with a beige folder in hand, and placed it beside my glass like it was a dessert menu. Brantley hadn't touched his soup. Instead, he leaned back with his phone on the table, face down, but screen glowing faintly. A ring light still hummed faintly in the corner. Its blue hue flickered across the wall like a heartbeat waiting to change tempo. Gideon cleared his throat. "Before you go, there's just one thing we'd like you to sign. Simple paperwork. It just helps clean up some of the transitions while we form the LLC around the house." I looked down at the folder without touching it. "What kind of LLC?" Brantley jumped in like a kid who finally got to say his line. "Brand development. The Whitaker legacy. We're working on a full media rollout. YouTube, TikTok, brand deals. It's picking up. Having the house secured legally just streamlines everything." "Streamlines what?" I asked. "You already took my name off the deed." Velda moved closer, placing her hand gently on the back of my chair. "It's just a formality. You're still family. This is just so there's no confusion later, you understand." I opened the folder slowly, careful not to crease anything. It smelled like fresh ink. That smell always made my skin crawl. It reminded me of times I wasn't supposed to read the fine print. The document was full of soft language, temporary rights, acknowledgement of transition, clarity of ownership. But tucked in the 5th paragraph, just before the signature line, was a clause that jumped out like a trap. I would be waiving all remaining claims to the property, past, present, and future. Brantley drummed his fingers on the table. "It's not a big deal. You moved out years ago." Gideon's tone turned stern. "You're overthinking it. This is about helping your brother succeed. The least you can do is not stand in his way." I looked up at all of them. My father with arms crossed, my mother smoothing non-existent wrinkles in her blouse, my brother already half turned toward his phone again. "I'm not signing this," I said. Velda's smile faltered. Brantley's fingers stopped. "I'll need to have a lawyer look at it first," I added, keeping my voice calm. Gideon slammed his hand lightly against the table. Not hard, but loud enough to say he was done being polite. "We're your family. You still don't trust us?" I looked him straight in the eye. "It's because you're my family that I have to be careful." There was a pause, long enough for the room to go silent except for the low buzz of the ring light in the corner. Velda gathered the folder, closed it gently, and set it back on the sideboard without another word. She didn't offer dessert. No one asked if I needed anything before leaving. I stood, grabbed my coat from the hook, and walked toward the front hallway. The garlic knots were still on the counter, untouched. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard footsteps behind me. Brantley. "You know," he said, "you've always acted like you were above all of this, like you were too good for the rest of us." I didn't answer. He took a step closer. "But let's be real. You wouldn't even have good credit if I hadn't used your name when I needed to launch my channel. You didn't even know, did you?" I froze. "What did you just say?" He smiled. "Relax. It was just for equipment. A couple thousand. You weren't even using your limit. You should be proud someone finally made that name useful." I turned slowly. My hands were still in my coat pockets. Not clenched. Just still. "That wasn't yours to use. Come on, it's family. And look where I am now. People know me. I've got a real following. All because I took a little initiative." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I didn't even flinch. That's what they expected. Instead, I nodded once. "Thanks for telling me." Then I walked out the door. The air was colder than I remembered. Night had fully settled in. The street lamps cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the wind carried the smell of someone grilling 3 houses down. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I reached the car. I pulled it out, hands steady now. Unknown sender. Subject line: "Regarding the loan in your name, I think you need to see this." I opened the message, but I didn't read it right away. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, letting the screen's glow light my face in the dark. They hadn't just taken the house, they used my name, and now they wanted my silence. It wasn't the first time they took something without asking, but this time, they left a trail. I didn't sleep much that night. The kind of restlessness that comes not from fear, but from clarity, the kind of clarity that arrives only after the fog of denial has finally lifted. I stayed in the guest room, the same one that used to be mine when I was 13, and thought glow-in-the-dark stars could keep the darkness out. The wallpaper was different now, and the bed was smaller than I remembered, but the silence? That hadn't changed. At 6 in the morning, I heard movement in the kitchen. Velda had always been an early riser, but she made noise on purpose, like she wanted everyone to know she was working, even if nobody asked her to. I pulled on a sweater and stepped out, barefoot on cold linoleum, just in time to see her setting the table. She glanced at me with her usual half-smile. "Thought I'd make breakfast. We didn't get to talk much last night." I almost laughed. But instead, I nodded and said, "Smells good." She poured coffee like nothing happened. No mention of the deed, no mention of the folder, just eggs, toast, and too much sugar in the creamer pitcher. Brantley walked in a few minutes later, hairstyled like he hadn't just spent the night re-uploading filtered selfies and sunset quotes. He kissed Velda on the cheek and grabbed a piece of toast before sitting down with his phone already in his hand. "We're doing a brunch reel," he said casually. "Mom, keep your hair like that, it feels real." She actually giggled, like that was normal. I sat down across from them, spooning eggs onto my plate, watching their performance unfold. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The roles were already set. Brantley the golden boy, Velda the supportive matriarch, and me, the background noise they hoped would stay quiet. Velda glanced at me over her coffee. "I was thinking maybe we could take a photo later. Just a few of us. Nothing fancy." "Sure," I said, without asking who us meant. As I chewed on toast that tasted like cardboard, my mind drifted. It always did when I was stuck in that house too long. 6 years ago, I had just landed my first big commission, $12,000 after taxes. I was so proud I cried in the car. I'd planned to open a savings account, maybe start on a down payment for a tiny place of my own. That same week, Velda cornered me in the hallway. She held a manila envelope, said she'd been thinking about the roof, how it needed repair, how hard it was to manage bills with Gideon's back pain acting up. "We're family," she said. "Let me hold on to the money for now. We'll put it toward the house. You'll always have a place here." I wanted to believe her. I needed to. So I handed it over. the roof never got fixed. I waited 3 months before I asked about the money. Her response? "Why are you keeping tabs, Anitra? That's not how family works." She made it sound like I had betrayed her, like asking about my own savings was an insult to the system they'd created without me. Back in the present, Velda was cutting strawberries with a knife that looked too clean to be hers. Brantley had already positioned his phone across from the table, angling for a wide shot. The ring light was back, now clipped onto a cabinet handle. It pulsed faintly. "Let's get a shot before the food gets cold," Brantley said. I stood without being asked. It was a reflex at that point. Velda reached for the phone. "Here, baby, I'll take it. Just the 3 of us." She meant her, Brantley, and Gideon, who'd just walked in from the garage, wiping grease off his hands like he'd been building something meaningful instead of hiding from the truth. I stood off to the side, not exactly out of frame, but not included either. They smiled. Brantley leaned in, teeth bright. Velda tilted her head. Gideon half grinned, like someone forced to sit for a DMV photo. The camera clicked. Brantley checked the screen. "Perfect." I sat back down and finished my coffee. No one said anything else. No invitation to join. No redo. Later that evening, back in the guest room, I opened Instagram. Brantley had already posted the photo. Caption: "Family, whole and strong." There was a soft filter, a few sparkles added for aesthetic, but what stood out most was the frame, or rather, the lack of one. I had been cropped out. My shoulder was barely visible, a blur of beige sweater near the edge of the picture. They didn't even ask me to step out. They simply removed me afterward, like a stain on an old tablecloth. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred, then tapped delete without hesitation. They always wanted a picture-perfect family. They just never wanted me in the frame. A few minutes later, another email came in, same sender as before. Subject: "You should see the real deed. Ask your grandfather. He never changed it." I didn't respond. Not yet. But something inside me moved. Something old, something quiet. It didn't feel like hope. Not exactly. It felt like proof. They erased me from a photo. But they forgot. Some things were signed in ink. By mid-morning, the sky over Modesto was already bleached with sun, and the house had fallen into that strange weekend rhythm. No real plans, no real words, just a kind of artificial peace. Velda had retreated into the laundry room, humming some half-forgotten church tune, and Gideon was in the garage, banging metal like it owed him something. Brantley, unsurprisingly, was back in the living room, arranging his mini studio setup like he was preparing to film a political broadcast instead of another glossy reel about overcoming generational dysfunction. I could hear his voice before I saw him, testing tone, cadence, trying out phrasing like an actor feeling out his mark. "This is what rebuilding looks like," he said to the phone propped up on a ring light stand. "When a family finally chooses to put the past aside and invest in a future led by someone who actually shows up." I stepped into the hallway quietly. He hadn't noticed me yet. Velda hovered off camera, brushing her hair behind her ear, wearing a soft pink blouse she never wore unless she was about to be seen. She looked proud, the kind of pride that turns a blind eye when it benefits her. I stood just out of frame, arms crossed, watching the show unfold. "It wasn't easy," Brantley continued. "But the truth is, every family has that one member who leaves, who disappears when things get hard. And sometimes when they come back, they expect things to be the same, but growth doesn't wait." The comments section on his screen flickered with heart emojis and affirmations. I didn't know these people, but I knew their type. Strangers who'd swallow a good lighting setup, and a sad backstory faster than they'd question a single fact. He turned slightly, clearly savoring the momentum. "We made the decision to pass this house on to someone who's building something. Someone who didn't abandon the legacy." I stepped forward then, not into the frame, but just close enough that he noticed. His eyes flicked toward me, but he didn't stop the stream. Velda's smile grew tighter. I didn't speak yet. Instead, I sat on the arm of the couch, deliberately out of the shot, and folded my hands in my lap. Brantley paused like he was recalibrating, then said, And while it's tempting to dwell on the past, we're focused on the future. A house is more than a building. It's a story, and I'm honored to carry that story forward. That was it, I snapped. Strong enough to save your credit, I said, voice calm but unmistakable. Strong enough to pay for the new roof you never fixed, but not enough to be called family? His mouth hung open, the way it did when the script broke and no one was feeding him the next line. Velda's hand shot out toward the phone, fumbling for the screen. She finally tapped it off, muttering, "This isn't the time." Gideon must have heard the shift. He walked in, wiping his hands with an old rag. His face was red, whether from the heat or the noise. I didn't care. "That's enough out of you," he said. "No," I replied, standing slowly. "Not yet." I left the room without waiting for anyone to follow. The air outside was warmer than I expected. I stood on the porch for a moment, phone in hand, scrolling through old numbers until I found his name. Clemens. Grandpa. I hadn't called him in years, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think he wanted to hear from me. He picked up on the second ring. "Anitra?" I swallowed. "I need to talk to you about something." A pause. "It's time." The next morning, the house was quiet again. I stayed in my room, barely speaking. No one knocked. No one asked if I needed anything. Brantley didn't mention the stream. Velda made breakfast, but she didn't set a plate for me. Around noon, I sat outside on the porch swing, flipping through memories in my head like old photo albums you don't want to touch, but can't throw away. And then, out of nowhere, one came sharply into focus. I was 10. It was summer. Gideon had finally agreed to show me how to fix the bathroom faucet. I was excited. I thought it meant something. I stood beside him, holding a flashlight. I kept it steady, like he asked. I passed him the tools in the order he needed. I didn't complain. And still, after 30 minutes of silence, he muttered, "You're not strong enough for this kind of work. I should have had another son." He didn't say it in anger. He said it like it was fact, like it was written somewhere. I didn't cry in that moment. I didn't say anything at all. But I remember I didn't hold the flashlight as steady after that. It's strange, the things that carve you. Back in the present, I rose from the swing and walked back into the house. Brantley was in the kitchen again, flipping through his phone. Velda stood behind him, arms folded. Gideon was in his usual chair, unread newspaper in hand. No one looked up. I cleared my throat. I called Grandpa. Brantley laughed dryly. "What's he gonna do? Bring out his old medals?" Gideon snorted. "He left this house to me. Always said I'd know what to do with it." I stared at him. "And did you? Know what to do?" No answer. "I don't need you to like me," I continued. "I don't even need you to love me, but I won't let you erase me." Then I turned back toward the hallway, walked into the guest room, and began to pack. Outside, in the far distance, I heard the soft thrum of an engine. I told them to stop. I told them what would happen if they pushed further. They didn't listen. The call with Grandpa Clemens was brief. He didn't ask for every detail. He didn't need to. All he said was, "I'll be in town tomorrow. Don't sign anything, and don't leave the house." I said okay, hung up, and stood there in the driveway watching the sun dip behind the neighbors' rooftops like it was hiding from what was coming. When I walked back inside, the house had already shifted, not physically, but atmospherically. Something about the way the air felt, a stillness before the strike. Dinner was quiet, not silent, just loaded. Brantley chewed louder than usual, intentionally, like his food was more important than any conversation that might start. Velda served roast chicken like she hadn't excluded me from a family photo earlier, and Gideon sat at the head of the table with his usual stare, the kind that always felt like a judgment, even when he hadn't spoken yet. It didn't take long. "We need to talk about your attitude," Gideon said, setting down his fork with precision. "You've been walking around this house like you're owed something." Brantley jumped in without missing a beat. "And people are talking, saying you're trying to sneak the house back under your name." I stared at him. "What people?" "Let's not pretend this is coming out of nowhere," Velda added, not even looking up from her plate. "You disappear for years, and now you're suddenly interested in paperwork. Curious timing. I didn't flinch. Curious that none of you ever called while I was gone, but now that I show up, you all suddenly care what I'm doing. Brantley rolled his eyes. You're digging around county records, Anitra. That's not curious, that's suspicious. Before I could respond, Gideon pulled out a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket and slapped it onto the table. The motion wasn't violent, but loud enough to cut the air. We saw your name in the public record inquiries. You've been requesting deed history, email trails, trying to undo what we've already settled. He pointed at the top of the page, a scan from the county clerk's office, my name, my email. I wasn't undoing anything, I said, steady. I was checking the truth. You know, that thing we stopped doing in this house a long time ago? Velda muttered. You've always had a way of twisting things to make yourself sound righteous. And you've always had a way of ignoring anything that didn't fit your version of this family, I replied calmly. Brantley leaned forward. You know what your problem is. You never wanted to be a part of this. You just want to drop in when it's convenient and act like a victim. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the three of them. Let me remind you of something. They looked at me, annoyed, not nervous. 4 years ago, when you all were this close to losing this house, you didn't ask Brantley to help. You didn't go to the bank. You called me. No one spoke. I could see Velda's fingers stiffen around her knife. I wired the money the same day, took it from my savings without hesitation. I didn't even ask for a receipt. Brantley's face darkened. That's ancient history. Oh, I remember, I continued. Because when the foreclosure notice was pulled and you kept the house, Velda went around telling neighbors Brantley had figured something out, that he saved the house. Meanwhile, I was making minimum payments on my own rent, covering for a family that didn't even want to say my name. Velda set her fork down slowly. You did that out of choice. No, I said sharply. I did it because I was raised to believe that if I didn't, I wasn't a real part of this family, that somehow being useful was the only way I'd be allowed to belong. Brantley scoffed. You always act like we owe you something. You don't owe me, I said. But you don't get to rewrite the story either. I stood from the table. The silence that followed was thick and uneven. I knew the next line would be some variation of sit down or don't walk away. But this time, they didn't even try. This is your last chance, I said, voice even, to step back before you lose everything. Gideon chuckled. What can you even do? Drag us into court. You don't have the stomach for that. Brantley smirked. You can't out-family us, Anitra. You're not the golden child. I met his eyes. I don't need to be. I just need to tell the truth. Then I turned and walked upstairs. My old room felt smaller now, but it was quiet, and it was mine for the moment. I began folding my clothes, not packing to leave, but to be ready for whatever happened next. As I zipped the suitcase, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Velda's voice came through the crack in the door, low and pointed. You've never belonged here. You just didn't realize it until now. I didn't turn around. I didn't open the door. Instead, I spoke through it, steady and sure. I did realize it. That's why I'm not staying quiet anymore. They were warned. And yet, the next morning, my name was still buried, so I started digging. The sun hadn't fully broken over the rooftops when I stepped into the backyard. The air was cool, dry. It smelled faintly of burnt grass and something acrid, like melted plastic. At first, I thought someone had left the grill uncovered again, maybe Brantley trying to film another cookout reel. But then I saw Gideon hunched over the fire pit, sleeves rolled to his elbows, smoke curling upward from a small stack of smoldering papers. I didn't need to ask what he was burning. I already knew. His posture was too deliberate, the way he fed pages into the flames one by one, like he was performing a ritual, not cleaning up trash. Velda stood just inside the doorway, arms folded tight across her chest, not saying a word, not stopping him. I stepped closer, the dry crunch of gravel under my shoes making them both glance in my direction. You should go inside, Gideon said flatly. What are you doing? Tidying up. He didn't stop feeding the fire. One page slipped from his fingers and floated momentarily before catching flame mid-air. disintegrating before it even hit the ashes. "That was a copy of Grandpa's will," I said. "I didn't ask it. I stated it." Gideon didn't flinch. "Whatever you think he promised, it's ashes now." Velda's silence behind him wasn't indifference. It was agreement. She may not have said the words, but her stillness was a vote, a quiet nod that said, "Let him finish." I stepped forward, bent down at the edge of the pit, and caught a charred corner of paper before it crumbled completely. The ink was smudged, but I could still make out part of my name, Anitra, curved into the page like it was trying to hold on. "You think destroying one piece of paper changes anything?" I asked. Gideon finally looked at me. His eyes weren't angry. They were dismissive. "This house is ours now," he said. "You really think some old document changes that? You left. You gave up your place." I stood up, brushing ash from my fingertips. "You never gave me one." Back inside, I sat at the small table in the guest room, laptop open. My hands hovered over the keys before finally navigating to the encrypted folder I had kept on a USB drive. I named the folder Clemens Will Originals, the same day Grandpa gave me the scanned documents in person. He'd pulled them from a locked box, handed them to me with that same measured calm he used when he taught me how to drive. "Just in case," he'd said. I opened the file, the date, the signature, the notarization, all intact, untouched. They burned the wrong copy. As the files loaded, my mind drifted back, further than the will. Back to the moment I started fading in their eyes. Sophomore year. I had just landed a full academic scholarship to UC Davis. It wasn't a fancy school, but it was mine. I had picked my classes, even made friends in the dorm chat. Then Brantley dropped out of community college, claimed he was pivoting into digital media, whatever that meant back then. Velda sat me down 2 days later. "We need help at home," she'd said. "Your brother's trying to figure himself out, and your father's back has been acting up again." I said I could juggle both, stay enrolled, commute. I offered options, but she started crying, the kind of tears you don't challenge, just quiet, slow, guilt-wrapped sobs. She called me the responsible one, told me it was only temporary, so I withdrew. I stayed home. By the time I tried to reapply, my scholarship had expired. Brantley had a new ring light, a camera, and a half-finished podcast studio in the garage. He called it his hustle. Velda called it his purpose. No one called it what it really was, theft. Back in the present, I finished compiling the files. I encrypted them again, this time attaching them to an email titled "For Review, Property Dispute." I addressed it to a paralegal I'd worked with years ago on a zoning case. Her name was Margot. She was good, quiet, but brutal when she needed to be. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked into the living room. All three of them were there. Brantley on the couch scrolling his phone, Velda in her recliner pretending to read, Gideon by the window with a mug he never drank from. They looked up, but no one said anything. "Try to delete me again," I said, voice even. "Next time, I erase you legally." Brantley laughed. "You're bluffing." Velda frowned. "Anitra, this isn't the way." "I'm not asking," I interrupted. Gideon stepped forward. "You want to take this to court?" "I'm ready." He paused. "You don't want to fight. You've already started one." I turned and left the room, letting the silence chase me up the stairs. That night, I didn't pack. I didn't run. I just waited. They weren't just trying to bury my name. They were preparing to bury the truth. It was just after 10 a.m. when I walked back into the kitchen. The smell of burnt paper still clung faintly to my clothes, and the memory of Gideon standing over the fire pit, smirking while the edges of that will curled into smoke, hadn't faded. But something inside me had shifted. The line between surviving and confronting had finally cracked, and I wasn't the one shaking anymore. I opened my laptop on the counter and pulled up the encrypted folder again. A few keystrokes, and the documents lit up the screen like proof that wouldn't burn. I drafted the email quickly, attached the originals, and addressed it to Margot, the paralegal I trusted. Then I hovered over the send button for only a second. Click. When I turned around, the house was silent. Brantley had gone live barely 24 hours ago, pushing his rehearsed narrative to thousands of followers. Velda was probably somewhere rewriting the family story for her circle at church. But me? I had proof now, and the first move belonged to me. I stepped into the living room where all three of them were gathered, Gideon with his coffee, Velda rearranging throw pillows like that ever fixed anything, and Brantley scrolling his feed like it held the answers. "I've submitted the originals," I said, my voice even. "If anyone tampers with this house again, it becomes a court issue." Gideon lowered his cup slowly. "You're threatening us?" "No," I replied. "I'm telling you, we're past threats." Brantley stood. "You think your little folder changes anything? You think paperwork beats blood?" Velda finally spoke, softly but sharp. "After everything we've done for you, this is what we get?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That was when the energy shifted. I saw it first in Gideon's jaw, the way it clenched, then in the way he stood, slow, deliberate, like something boiling had finally reached the surface. He stormed past me without another word, out through the garage door. The hinges creaked, then slammed. For a moment, everything was still. Then I heard it, the scrape of metal, the clatter of something dragged. And seconds later, his voice. "You stole this house from Brantley!" I rushed to the porch just in time to see him swinging a red gasoline canister from the shelf by the tool bench. He tore off the cap, then sloshed the liquid across the wooden planks like it was just another Saturday chore. Brantley followed, phone in hand. Already filming. Velda trailed behind them both, shouting over the wind. "She's nothing, you hear me? Nothing!" I froze. The gasoline soaked into the porch steps with an almost greedy speed, pooling near the threshold. It reeked, sharp, dizzying, unmistakable. My foot stopped inches from it. Any closer and I'd be standing in it. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. Brantley's phone caught every second. I watched the screen flicker back my image, me, still, watching it all unfold. Behind his camera, he grinned. "This is going to break the internet," he muttered. The rage in Gideon's voice had shifted to something more desperate now. "You think you can waltz back in and take what we built? This house was never yours." Behind us, a curtain moved from the neighbor's window. Another porch light turned on across the street, even though it was morning. Faces were starting to appear. Curious, wary, witnesses. Still, I didn't move. My hands trembled, but I stood rooted, eyes locked on Brantley's camera lens. And then I spoke. Just one sentence. "Let the world see who you are." I didn't say it loud. I didn't need to. The quiet in my voice made it land harder than any scream. Brantley's smile faltered. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes other than mockery. Hesitation. Not guilt. Just realization. That this wasn't going to play out the way he imagined. Velda turned to him. "Turn that off." "But," I said, "turn it off." He fumbled with the screen, his earlier confidence slipping with every second. Just then, the rumble of an engine echoed from the far end of the street, a Buick, familiar, beige, and steady. It rolled to a quiet stop at the curb, and the door creaked open with the kind of patience only a man in his 80s could carry. Clemens stepped out. He wore his old army windbreaker, zipped to the top. His back was straight, his expression unreadable. The moment he stepped onto the sidewalk, the world seemed to inhale. Every sound dulled. Brantley's phone went silent. Velda's mouth snapped shut. Even Gideon paused mid-rant. He walked up the path, boots echoing against the brick, then stopped at the foot of the porch, eyes scanning the gasoline puddles, the open can, the tangled trio before him. His gaze found me last. What the hell is going on here? He didn't need to raise his voice. The world tilted the moment he walked in. The second Grandpa Clemens stepped onto the porch, everything changed. The neighbors who had started peeking through their blinds pulled back just slightly, enough to listen without being seen. Brantley lowered his phone without even realizing it. Gideon, who only moments earlier had been shouting with gasoline sloshing across the steps, stood frozen. Even Velda, who had declared me nothing, went silent, as if someone had finally turned off the power to her volume. Clemens didn't say a word for the first few moments. He looked at each of us, his gaze sharp as ever, despite the fine lines around his eyes and the stiff gait in his stride. But when he looked at me, something softened in his face, just for a second, just long enough for me to breathe again. He took in the soaked porch, the red can tipped over by Gideon's boot, the lighter still clutched in his hand. Clemens pointed his chin toward the mess and asked, calm as daylight, "You poured gas on the house I built? On the girl who defended it in silence for years?" Gideon didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stood there with his jaw tight and that look men get when they realize they went too far but don't know how to walk it back without losing face. Clemens stepped closer. "Well, say something." Gideon glanced at Velda like she might step in, but she didn't. For once, she had no lines ready. Clemens looked at me next. "Is it true?" I nodded. My hands were still trembling slightly, but my voice didn't crack. "Everything I said, everything they did?" Brantley opened his mouth, but Grandpa held up a hand. "You shut that camera and sit down." Brantley froze mid-sentence. Then, without another word, he sat on the edge of the porch rail and placed his phone face down. That was the moment I knew the tide had finally turned. Clemens reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. It was the same windbreaker he'd had for as long as I could remember. Olive green, zippered up to his collarbone, still crisp despite the years. From it, he pulled a thick envelope sealed with red wax. He took his time opening it. No rush, no drama, just quiet, deliberate motion. He unfolded a document and held it up so everyone could see. "This," he said, "is the only version of my will that matters." I knew what it was before he even read it. I recognized the faint blue lines of the notary stamp, the ink from his fountain pen that bled slightly in the corners of his signature. "This property," he read aloud, "is willed, unconditionally, to Anitra Elaine Gunn. It has been this way since she was 18. I never changed it. I never planned to." Velda inhaled sharply but said nothing. Clemens continued, "You can scream about bloodlines, loyalty, or who stood in which kitchen when, but this," he tapped the document, "this is the law. This is the truth." Silence. Not the kind that follows a fight, but the kind that follows a funeral, when even the air around you feels respectful. Velda lowered her gaze to the floor, her lips pressed into a line that used to be used for correction. Now, it just looked like shame. Gideon's knuckles went white around the handle of the lighter he still hadn't put down. But he didn't speak. He didn't challenge it. Brantley slouched further on the rail. The light on his phone, still faintly blinking before, finally went dark. I didn't feel triumph. No relief either. What I felt was space. Space in my lungs. Space between who I used to be and who I could become now that I wasn't spending all my energy surviving. Clemens turned back toward the porch steps. "Pack what's yours," he said to Gideon and Velda. "You're leaving, and she's staying." The finality in his voice didn't leave room for questions. I stood on the edge of the porch while they shuffled past me, quiet, slower than they were used to. Velda tried to catch my eye, but I didn't give her the satisfaction. Gideon muttered something under his breath that even he didn't seem confident in. Brantley carried nothing, just his phone, now dark and useless. I didn't cry, I didn't gloat. I just watched the house return to stillness as their footsteps faded down the walkway. And when Clemens finally stood beside me again, watching them drive off, he didn't pat me on the back. He didn't say, "Good job." He didn't need to, because we both knew. It wasn't revenge, it was correction. The house was quiet again. But quiet doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's just the absence of screams. An echo where rage used to live. A pause, not a healing. After they left, I didn't move for a long time. I stood by the window, watching their car shrink into the distance until it turned the corner and vanished, taking with it years of chaos, blame, and emotional debris. It felt strange, that kind of departure. So final, so clean, so quiet, like the silence had been rehearsing its return, and now, finally, it was performing. The air inside settled quickly, unnervingly so, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath for months and had only now begun to exhale. I moved slowly through each room, barefoot. Not because I needed to check for damage or assess what was missing, nothing was, but because I wanted to feel the floors under my feet again. I needed to walk the house like it was mine. Not because a deed said so, not because someone handed me keys or permission, but because the ghosts that haunted every doorway, those who'd once stood in these spaces wielding control, cloaked in nostalgia, were finally gone. Gone. In the hallway, I passed the old family photo, the one that had always hung slightly off-center on the wall, tilted just enough to be irritating, but never enough for anyone to fix it. I had stopped noticing that detail years ago, but now it caught my eye immediately. Maybe I had grown more sensitive to imbalance. In the photo, Brantley stood confidently in the middle, one arm slung around Velda's shoulder like a crown, his grin wide and practiced. I was there too, tucked slightly behind them, smiling politely, but blurred and a bit out of focus, like I had already been edited out, even then, like I was never meant to take up space. I pulled the frame from the wall and turned it over in my hands, slowly. "You always wanted the center," I whispered. "I just wanted a place." The sun had started to rise, sending thin beams of amber light through the slats in the blinds. I walked to the front porch. The boards were dry, clean. Someone had washed away the gasoline stains. I hadn't even noticed them do it. Probably Grandpa. That was how he operated. Quietly, thoroughly, without demand for acknowledgement. His kind of justice didn't need applause. It just got the job done. I sat on the porch bench and pulled a small envelope from my coat pocket. It was already worn at the corners, the paper soft from how many times I'd folded and unfolded it through the night. Inside was a photo I'd tucked inside a book spine years ago, one of the few I had never burned. I was maybe 7, hugging Gideon from behind, my small arms wrapped around his waist, my face hidden in the fabric of his shirt. His hand rested lightly over mine. It had been a rare good day, a county fair. I'd won a cheap stuffed bear at a rigged game booth, and he had let me eat a second funnel cake just because I asked. The photo wasn't proof of some perfect relationship, but it was evidence of a moment when things were okay, when I had felt safe. I slipped the envelope onto the bench beside me. If they ever came back, if they ever dared return, I wanted them to see it, not as an olive branch, but as a mirror. Inside the envelope was a note, handwritten, short. "You taught me silence. I used it to survive, but I will not use it to disappear anymore." I stood, walked inside, and I closed the door behind me. I didn't slam it. There was no performance in the motion, no finality laced with bitterness. I just closed it. In the kitchen, the kettle let out a soft whistle. Grandpa was already there, seated at the table, his posture relaxed, like he'd been waiting without worry. 2 mugs sat between us, one in front of him, one clearly meant for me. Without a word, he slid a 3rd mug into the center of the table. Empty. I sat down, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. The tea was dark, unsweetened, strong the way Grandpa liked it. It tasted like reality, sharp but clean. He didn't ask what I had written in the letter. He didn't ask about the photo or the envelope. He didn't need to. Some people understand without needing to be walked through the history. Outside, the birds had returned. I heard them through the open screen door, chirping, rustling, layering the morning air with the kind of softness you miss when you've been trained to listen for slammed doors or voices raised from behind thin walls. News travels fast in towns like this. That afternoon, a neighbor stopped by. She didn't ask questions. She didn't linger. Just left a small woven basket of oranges on the porch and whispered as she turned to go, "I saw everything. Good for you." I thanked her with a nod, smiled faintly, and returned inside. Later in the evening, I checked my phone. There were messages, not dozens, just a few. Enough. A couple from coworkers I hadn't spoken to beyond the elevator. One from an old friend I hadn't seen since college. All of them had seen the video. Brantley had reposted it, again, this time with a new title. "Family Gone Wrong, When You Let the Wrong One In." Always a spin, always a narrative. Except this time, it didn't work. The comments didn't celebrate him. They didn't pity him. The internet turned quickly. Words like manipulative, dangerous, narcissist, and performative peppered the thread. People had seen the footage, the gas can in Gideon's hand, Velda's cutting words, Brantley's camera positioned just right, as if he were the director of a stage play about someone else's pain. His follower count dropped steadily. A few sponsors pulled back quietly, scrubbing his name from their lists. No public statements, just quiet exits, the kind that say more than words ever could. His moment was over. And me? I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel joy. I just felt still. Later that night, Grandpa and I sat in the backyard. No porch lights, just stars and shadows and the rhythmic cadence of crickets in the distance. He handed me a notebook. The cover was plain, the pages untouched. "For the things you don't want to forget," he said, his voice low, steady. I opened to the first page, paused, and wrote a single line. "Some wounds don't close, but they stop bleeding when someone finally says, 'You didn't imagine it. It really happened.'" And that was the beginning. Sometimes what we call family is really just a stage where loyalty is demanded but rarely returned. If someone has to silence you to stay in power, maybe they were never family at all. What would you have done in Anitra's shoes? Have you ever been the one pushed out to protect someone else's image? If this story struck a chord, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More true-to-life stories about betrayal, survival, and quiet revenge are coming soon.